Hey everybody, welcome back. This is another spotlight video on card from Oath of the Gatewatch that I'm really excited about. Last time I talked about Eldrazi Displacer, so you should go check out that video. I talked about it extensively this time. I'm looking at the card Deceiver of Form, card that is very unique in my opinion. I was very excited when I saw it spoiled. I haven't seen it be as prevalent as the Displacer, but I think it's very exciting and I look forward to seeing what we can do with it. Remember that I'm looking at these from the perspective of Limited, so I haven't really put much thought into what Deceiver of Form can do in Standard right now, and I don't really see it making waves in any other format besides maybe Commander, but it's something that I think we should definitely consider in Limited, and I'll be looking at it from that perspective. So first off, let's look at the card. Deceiver of Form is a 7-mana creature. It costs 6 generic and 1 colorless for an 8/8, and right off the bat, that's very good. Even though if we were to just consider this a vanilla creature, if you just took this as a big creature, an 8/8 for 7 is not bad. And remember that in Oath of the Gatewatch, the bodies on creatures are a little bit smaller than they were for Battle for Zendikar. You're still going to have that one pack of battle floating around, but this time big creatures can really dominate. And a 7-mana 8/8 is very unlikely to fold to creatures. You're going to get an immediate effect out of its ability, so let's read what this does first. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you reveal the top card of your library. If you reveal a creature, you may have creatures you control other than Deceiver of Form become copies of that card until end of turn. You may then put that card on the bottom of your library. So it's not an actual scry because you do have to reveal the card, whereas in a scry you do not. But it's very close. You get to set up your draw. You get to decide whether you like it or not. And if you're flooded out, you can just put a land on the bottom, so on and so forth. So it gives you a little extra edge there. Obviously, while that, if all it did was scry, it'd be a little less exciting. We're looking at the whole picture here. So if you flip up a creature with this ability at the beginning of combat, before you've declared attacks, you may have the rest of your creatures become copies of that creature until end of turn. That to me seems like there's potential to just do insane things. And I'll be talking about some of the things you can do with it. Some aren't so insane, some of them are just very good. But overall, if I saw Deceiver of Form in my first pack, I'd almost always take it over most uncommons. There are a couple uncommons I'd probably take first, and then try to build around it. This is the definition of a build around rare. While it's good without the ability, it's even better. And what I mean by immediate effect is if you play this and you go to combat, you're getting something out of it. You're at least getting the scry, even if you're not using the full potential of the ability. It's also an easy card to splash, and notice splashes in quotes because the colorless mana, but by the time you get to 7, you're very likely going to have your alternative color of mana if you don't already have a ton of sources. By the time you're ready to cast a 7-drop, I hope you've already hit your splash color, so to speak, or your splash land. Not to mention that you can just play this off of things like Hedron Crawler or the Lantern and stuff like that. So it's not that hard to play, even if you don't have that many colorless sources in the deck. And finally, this is just a very powerful card in certain situations, but it is just that. It is a situational card. Sometimes it's just a big dumb vanilla creature, and I can actually see why people would pass this in draft. While it's exciting to me, it may just not be what you want in some sort of decks. Now, first off, before we turn into what the combo potential for this actually is, you need to consider the restraints that this puts on your deck building. From what I've noticed, Deceiver of Form leads you to create kind of weird decks. The reason I call this a double-edged sword is because you need a balance of, first off, creatures like this. You're looking at Hedron Crawlers, Eyeless Watchers, basically anything that's going to ramp you up or anything that's going to make a lot of bodies. Those are the creatures you want to be turning into big things off of Deceiver's ability. However, at the same time, you need to be flipping up creatures that are worth turning into with the Deceiver. So, obviously, you don't want to play Deceiver and then on the trigger, flip up a Hedron Crawler. You're not going to make all your creatures Hedron Crawlers for the turns, or Eyeless Watchers, or Wardens, or anything like that. You want the big creatures. So you need a balance of little guys and big guys. Thankfully, Deceiver of Form is a May ability, so if you flip up an Eyeless Watcher, you do not have to turn all your creatures into Eyeless Watchers for the turn. Also, you do not get into the battlefield triggers or anything degenerate like that. You just get basically the base card, and that's it. Now, if you have 1/1 counters on your creatures, those are added on top of the base card, but that's a little bit situational as well. But like I said, before you can even consider what you're doing with the Deceiver of Form, you need to take into account that you need to have A, creatures that you're turning into big things, and B, those big things to actually make it work. If you're missing part of that, or if you just have too many big creatures, it's not going to work out the way you plan. Now, moving into the fun stuff, from what I see, there are 3 different ways that you can play Deceiver of Form. One is the evasive route. You want to flip up creatures that are going to let you almost guarantee that you're pushing in damage. While it may not be tons and tons of damage at a time, it comes in the form of things like Benthic Infiltrator and Mind Melter. If you flip either one of these cards up on a Deceiver trigger, suddenly all your other creatures are unblockable for the turn. Of course, they're only getting in maybe 1 or 2 damage each, but that can really add up if you're playing a wide token strategy. Not to mention something like Infiltrator triggers and ingests per card, whereas Mind Melter in multiples isn't necessarily the best. You also have an option like Silent Skimmer, which kind of falls into the same category. Each creature that attacks is a guaranteed 2 damage on your opponent as soon as it declares an attack. If your opponent wants to stop that from happening, they have to either kill the Deceiver before you flip up a Skimmer, or they have to kill the Skimmers before they attack. If you have 2, 3, maybe 4 other creatures, that's 6, 8, 10 damage just attacking with Silent Skimmer. That's a lot of damage for just one effect. Also, I put Ghostly Sentinel here just as a common flyer in the Vigilance's upside. If you flip up a flyer, it can be something like Cloud Manto or a Courier Griffin, a 2 or 3 power flyer. If you flip that in, you're suddenly turning all your little tokens, all your little 1/1s into just these small evasive threats. Suddenly, 3 1/1 Scions accounts for 9 flying damage, and the Vigilance is just a perk there. Obviously, some of these keyword abilities come in quite handy. Vigilance is a nice one. First Strike and Menace are cards that you want to be flipping up because they turn your creatures into more evasive, more powerful versions of themselves. So the the evasion route is kind of cutesy, but I think it works, and it doesn't play creatures that are necessarily terrible. All of these are playable cards in their own right, but I'm a little more excited for the aggressive route, in my opinion. This is what I want to be doing if I've picked up Deceiver Forms. You want to flip up a huge fatty. I actually played in a 2-headed giant game where my opponent played a turn 7 Deceiver of Form, entered combat, triggered the ability, and flipped up Eldrazi Devastator, turning 2 or 3 of his other creatures into Devastators for the turn. That is the definition of devastating. 8/9 Tramplers will end the game just like that. Here you see a lot of tramples. Reality Smasher and Oran Reef Hydra are rares, but they come with upside. If you turn all your guys into Reality Smashers, your opponent is going to probably lose the game. Not to mention, you're casting a Reality Smasher on your next turn. That's another little perk of Deceiver of Form, is if you flip up a big creature, then your opponent not only has to worry about that creature and all of its copies for that turn, but you're likely going to keep that card on top and draw it during your next turn, making that threat relevant. Again, at the uncommon slot, cards like Plated Crusher, Walker of the Waste, and Breaker of Armies can just be very destructive. If you flip up a Breaker of Armies and you have 2 or 3 other creatures, game over. Your opponent has to block. It's going to eat their board, and anything that doesn't get blocked is pushing through for 10 damage. I really like Oran Reef Hydra because your creatures stay copies of that creature until the end of turn, so you can attack with 5/5 Tramplers, and then on the following main phase, if you follow up with a Forest, all of your creatures get 2 1/1 counters, which stay on them when they stop being copies of the Hydra. So I like the idea of taking a first pick Deceiver of Forms and just trying to draft a couple huge creatures. Now this is where it gets tricky. This is what I was talking about with the double-edged sword. You cannot take a Deceiver of Forms and take 5 or 6 Eldrazi Devastators, Breaker of Armies, Walker of the Waste. You have to balance it out. In my opinion, if I have the Deceiver, I'd be looking to get maybe 3 or 4 kind of jackpot hits, creatures like this, that are well worth flipping it up, but won't bog down the deck by having too many of them. You don't want tons of Eldrazi Devastators in your deck. Honestly, you never want really more than one of them, and that's in certain situations as well. But if you can get a nice mix of these, just a couple of them, and a good number of wide spread out token creatures, you can really go off by hitting one of these. The third route you can take, if you don't want to be evasive, you don't want to be aggressive, is just do completely busted things. The insane effects here, really insane effects. First off, Bane of Balaged, while being probably the most broken thing to do here, is also the most practical because it is an uncommon. Imagine this. You've played Deceiver of Forms. You have, let's say, I don't know, 2 other creatures on the field. You enter combat. You flip up a Bane of Balaged. Suddenly, those 2 other creatures are now 7/5s, and when each of them attacks, your opponent exiles 2 permanents. Bane of Balaged is already a nasty card on its own. While not being the most destructive thing on this list, exile and 2 permanents is a real cost, and when you start doing that in multiples while adding 7 power per attacker, that is absolutely insane. Bane of Balaged is an uncommon. While a lot of these things I've listed aren't really practical because they involve rares or mythic rares, Bane of Balaged is perfectly doable if you have a Deceiver of Form, and it comes in the correct order. Obviously, if you see Deceiver and you have it in your pool, and you plan on playing it, you will prioritize Bane of Balaged as almost a first pickable card when it's already a first pickable card, to be honest. Matter Reshaper is one that I really like because any creature that dies while it's a Matter Reshaper is going to trigger the death ability. You're going to get to flip up a card off the top, and you're going to get to put it on the battlefield if it's a converted mana cost 3 or less card. Otherwise, you just get to draw the card. And the funny thing about this is if you flip up Matter Reshaper and one of your creatures dies, well, you have a Matter Reshaper on top of your library, so you're going to replace it with another Matter Reshaper. That's absolutely insane. And then Omnath is just incredible. You have to be careful with legendary creatures because when you flip one up, if you choose to make all of your creatures a copy of that, you're only going to be left with one of them because of the legendary rule. Now that works in the favor of Omnath because of Omnath's second ability. When Omnath, Locus of Rage, or another elemental you control dies, Omnath deals 3 damage to target creature or player. So when you flip up Omnath, if you have a bunch of creatures, they all turn into Omnaths, and you have to kill off a bunch of them because of the legendary rule. Then each Omnath triggers for each Omnath that's dying simultaneously. Since Omnath is an elemental, the one that you leave on the board is going to deal 3 damage to your opponent for each other Omnath that died. Not to mention that each of those other Omnaths is going to deal 3 damage as well because Omnath triggers on its own death too. That's insane. If you have 3 creatures and you turn them all into Omnaths, you're going to kill off 2 of them. Those 2 that died will trigger their own death ability and deal 3 each. And then each Omnath will deal 3 more damage for each elemental die. And that's insane. You do the math. Tell me how much it adds up to. That's only having 3 other creatures on board. And this is a creature-heavy format. It's not too hard to stall out and get a bunch of creatures. But flipping up an Omnath is probably the most busted thing I can think of in Limited. Yes, it's a mythic. It's not going to happen. But please, please, just once let it happen. A couple other cards that work extremely well here. First off, From Beyond. From Beyond's a fine card. It's very good. It's almost first pickable, but a lot of times you see people pass it because of the bad reputation Green has in this format, and I understand that. But From Beyond works perfectly with Deceiver of Form. It gives you that little army that you need. It gives you those scions, and while you often use those scions to start chump blocking or get card advantage, so on and so forth, maybe you're using them for mana, if you can build those armies up and then sacrifice From Beyond to go get your Deceiver, you can do some really crazy things. Even just flipping up a small 2/3 or 3/2 creature is an upgrade to those scions. So From Beyond works very, very well, not only fetching your Deceiver, but giving you the army you need for Deceiver to reach its fullest potential. And then there's Conduit of Ruin, which might be the most busted interaction with Deceiver of Form. 2 ways this works. First off, if you flip up Conduit of Ruin, all of your creatures, besides the Deceiver, become 5/5s for the turn. In addition, you get that second ability during your second main phase if you haven't played a creature already, and every Conduit of Ruin that you control reduces the cost of your next spell by 2. If you're playing something like Desolation Twin, you can easily get something like a 2 or 4 mana Desolation Twin by doing this. Yeah, I know, those are all rares. It's not going to happen, but let me dream, okay? Also, if you draw Conduit of Ruin, guess what Conduit of Ruin can find? An Eldrazi creature, a colorless creature with converted mana cost 7 or greater. Do you know what colorless creature has converted mana cost 7 or greater? Deceiver of Form. So you can actually play Conduit of Ruin to get your Deceiver of Form, and then on the following turn, cast it for 5 mana instead of 7. Not to mention, the interaction works in reverse too. If you already control Deceiver of Form, and you cast Conduit of Ruin, you can set up your next flip too. Imagine that you have Deceiver of Form, you cast Conduit of Ruin, sorry for the zoom, and you put another something, let's just say, take the worst example, Eldrazi Devastator on top. This sets you up perfectly to flip the card that you want to flip up and just destroy your opponent. Conduit of Ruin and From Beyond are easily first pickable cards, but I've seen them go around sometimes, so it's not completely insane that this will happen at some point during draft, and I really look forward to doing it. I want it to happen. With that being said, let's sum up the pros and cons of Deceiver of Form. First off, it's a huge creature. It's hard to kill. It takes something like Smite the Monstrous, Isolation Zone, or Oblivion Strike. It's not going to die to burn. It's not going to die to very many combats. It's just a huge creature in a format that actually has reasonably mid-rangey creatures. It's easily splashable. That colorless mana should not be a problem by the time you're ready to cast a 7-drop, assuming you've built your deck to manage that. There are some potentially broken flips in this format, and I mean broken. Bane of Balaged being probably the most practical here as an uncommon is just unreasonable. Making an army of Bane of Balageds is just something that should never happen, even though, fingers crossed, I hope it does happen. Also, the pre-combat Scribe really makes this just worth playing as a big vanilla creature. You'd be less excited if it was just a 7-mana 8/8, but the fact that it lets you kind of control your draws a little bit makes it much, much better if you're not able to do anything broken with it. On the flip side of that, this is a faster format, and there are common removal spells like Isolation Zone and Oblivion Strike. Just 4 mana, remove anything. Those are going to get in the way of your big guys, and sometimes the speed of certain decks is going to make it difficult for you to set up a board presence or just get to 7 mana and cast a big creature while being able to survive. But at the same time, board stalls happen a lot in this format, and it should be reasonable to say that you can make a little army of creatures and then curve out into a Deceiver of Form a good number of times. Second thing, this requires a board presence to really be a big thing. If you cast this and it's the only creature you have, well, it's not really doing that much other than being a giant 8/8 for 7. You want a board presence to take full advantage of what Deceiver can do. And as I mentioned before, it leads to some awkward deck building where you need to balance the number of big hits you have with the number of little creatures you're actually transforming. That shouldn't be too hard to do, but it can be something where you need to prioritize certain cards higher than you normally would, or put emphasis on little creatures like Hedron Crawler or Eyeless Watcher, whereas normally you might not want those cards in your deck. With all being said and done, I think this card is great. I think it's exciting. I'm hesitant to call it a bomb because it does require you to build around it in a certain way. A 7-mana 8/8 vanilla creature is fine on its own, and the scry, quote-unquote, scry ability is still very, very good and worth playing on top of this creature. But what makes it fantastic is its ability to do just completely busted things with certain creatures, like the ones I've mentioned. Maybe I'm missing something in Limited. I'm sure there are a bunch of other interactions that just don't come to mind, but everything I've listed in this video are ones that just immediately popped into my head. Not to mention, I haven't looked at all at Deceiver Form's interaction with cards in Standard. Maybe there's something that this does that would just be completely insane if you flipped up the right creature off of it. Conduit of Ruin leads me to believe that maybe this card could be standard playable, but that's maybe being a little ambitious because I'm excited about it. But that being said, Deceiver of Form, take it, build around it, let me know what you're doing with it. Let me know the most busted thing that you've seen flipped up off of Deceiver of Form. For me, so far, the only time I've interacted with it, it's been Eldrazi Devastator, and that was enough to close out the game immediately. As always, please like, comment, subscribe on these videos. I'll be doing a couple more spotlight videos for Oath of the Gatewatch. There are a couple more cards in mind. I would like to know if there are any cards that you're excited about, and if so, leave them in the comments below and I'll take a look into them, see what I can whip together. Is there anything that is very combo-y to you? Anything that's really exciting? Anything new that you've never seen before in this set that you'd like to see me do a video on? Let me know in the comments. Please subscribe and like. And giving shout out to Deceiver of Form. Draft it. Tell me your story about it. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.